Hi, and welcome to Spiritual Alchemy Energy, the podcast with Julie. Tonight I have the amazing author, speaker, and teacher, Christian de la Huerta. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome.
So glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Been looking forward to our conversation.
Hey. So you just finished this book this last year, and Awakening the Soul of Power. Is not is synchronicity. So when in doing this podcast, it seems like it's the right time for this guest to come on my show for me personally in my life. So we have to talk about the ego because that's what your book's about. Because we say we cannot namaste the shadow away, right?
That's right. There's a little bit of spiritual bypassing in the circles that you and I run in. In which ultimate truth, like everything is love, are kind of used to avoid feeling or to run away from pain or from our wounds. And in my experience, you can't run away from that stuff. We can't suppress emotions. And also to the degree, we can't suppress emotions selectively either, right? So to the degree that we suppress our pain or our grief or our anger, then we're also suppressing our ability to feel joy. So it's not an effective strategy. And then what happens when we suppress the emotions, we suppress them and eventually we overreact. The next unfortunate one comes by and rubs us the wrong way, and we dump all of that repressed stuff on them, and then we got to clean up the mess. Or we suppress it and we suppress it and we suppress it. That what used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy, now we know from physics, from quantum physics, that it's true. Everything is energy. Energy can't be destroyed. So we suppress. We suppress that energy, and it's going to come out one way or the other, and the body's going to pay a toll, right? Cancer, heart attacks, ulcers.
Right, exactly. So I don't know where to start here. Where do we start with the ego? Kind of go through the process of explaining there's good ego and bad ego.
Yeah, and maybe start by explaining the ego, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about it, and we don't have enough time to dive deeply into it.
Right.
But we can say, there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. For most of us who know the word, will think arrogance, inflated sense of self, like he or she, she's got a big ego, he's got a big ego, and it is that, but it's a lot more than that. Here, I think the simplest way to describe it, it's a part of the mind that kind of synthesizes information and sensory information and can reach into the past, make sense of that. It can project into the future and somehow weave all of that into a coherent sense of self. Like there's this Christian, that's Julie. Ultimately, and it's an illusion, and it's both a really helpful illusion to have a sense of self. That's like, if we think about Homo sapiens sapiens, what that means we can translate as humans who know that we know. Right? So it's that self-reflexive consciousness that allows us to reflect back upon ourselves, so that we can use all our experience and to evolve and to grow. It's also the source of all our suffering. So that's the negative side of it, because once the ego developed in humans, that individual sense of self, that was our first split in consciousness. Before that, we fell at one with everything, like the rest of the other creatures on the planet who don't have a sense of self, like of an individual identity. So the ego is both very helpful and one of the reasons we're so successful, and it's also a cause for suffering, because now we can have a sense of loneliness, we can feel abandoned. We have a sense of our own mortality. So there's a price to pay for individuality.
Right. Mm-hmm. So you talk about spending some time in an ashram. Mm-hmm. And so you had to work through your ego and letting go of things and not being attached. To say the least, because you like sold everything, left, and went for 5 years. Was it close to 5 years?
5 years, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. 5 years of mostly celibacy, which if you would have told me I was going to do that, I would have laughed or maybe cried. And yet that wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part, I think, was the surrender part of it, because, you know, for people who may not know the guru-disciple relationship, the guru represents the divine, the sacred, whatever, you know, whatever we hold that, but through this person of that's a human being. And so, but surrendering to a guru who, in this case, was sometimes irrational, was an incredibly difficult thing to do, because if she got up one day and she said, "Oh, the sky is purple and yellow," and I was saying blue, the sky was purple and yellow. So for 5 years, surrendering my preferences, my desires, my perceptions, even to the divine, but through this human being, was incredibly difficult, and I'm incredibly grateful for it. It was like really, really difficult. And what I'm grateful for is, well, many things, but the main thing was that the level of surrender that happened in me. Because of that, I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for that experience. Plus, right. That's where I learned about the ego. That's where I learned about breathwork. That's where I learned about meditation. So I'm incredibly grateful for it, and really glad that I don't have to do it again.
Oh boy, I don't see myself doing that. Yeah, I never wanted to be under a guru, so to speak, or to become a guru myself, because everybody has free will, yeah. and choice, and they need to be their own masters, and that's basically through working with our ego, we are learning who we are and how we react to the world.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And you know, theoretically, like the guru-disciple relationship is supposed to get you there. It's supposed to not have you give up your own power. In the day-to-day, you know, everybody being human, sometimes that falls short of the mark. And in my case, that inherently hierarchical relationship, you know, after 5 years, it started to interfere with my own growth and my own spiritual evolution. And that's when I knew that it was time to leave. I actually knew a couple of years before, but it was also, it was a small community, and I knew that when I left, the community would implode. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, it did. And I felt really responsible for the teachings, even though my relationship with the guru had kind of lost credibility. I still felt very responsible for the community and for the teachings, but it just got to the point that at some point I needed to leave, no matter what.
Right. And sometimes you need to find a different teacher, or become your own teacher.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm like really sensitive to that word, like when even, and like, I don't even try to gurufy me. Don't even try to put me up on a pedestal, because I'm not available for that.
Subscribe. Okay. The ego versus higher self difference. How do we decipher who's talking? Is it our ego or our higher self?
That's a great question. And let's use the metaphor of the baseball on the stadium to help us understand that better. So if you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. So it's this tiny part of who we are. Who we are is actually the stadium. And yet we've gotten confused, right? Like, it's a confusion and identification. We think we're the baseball, we're actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny part of who we are to run the show, and to think that it is all who we are. And we make choices, like really important choices, about relationships, about what we do with our lives, what we study, about job opportunities, about moving here or moving there. And we make all these big choices from its very small, tiny, limited, and always fear-based perspective. So how do we know who's speaking inside of our heads? The ego, I like to say that the ego went to law school. So it's always using big words, big concepts, it's pulling from here or pulling from there to build a case and prove that it's right. It's also very reactive. It takes everything personally. It's very good about projecting and blaming and not taking personal accountability. And it's got a very big mouth. It's what the Buddhists call the monkey mind, right? So it's that part of us, that inner monologue that drives us crazy, and that sometimes doesn't leave us alone. And because the moment we get up in the morning, before our feet even hit the floor, it's got something to say about everyone and everything, and it spends a lot of time futurizing, planning what it's going to do, or rehashing and ruminating about the past that is gone. And very little time spent, and the only thing we know is real, right? That is not a memory or figment of our imaginations, which is the present moment. So how do we know who's talking? So whenever we find ourselves building a case or using big words or trying to prove that we're right, that's it. It's ego. We know that's where we're coming from. The voice of the stadium, or the higher self, whatever you want to call it, our own individual piece of sacred real estate that expresses itself through us. It's that still, quiet voice inside, right? And it has very simple, quiet, very simple words and delivered very quietly. So we gotta, first of all, get through the crazy chatter of the monkey mind and drop down so that we can hear the stillness, right? And its voice, it's very simple, right? It'll say things like yes or mm-mm. Do that, or I wouldn't go there. When do we get into trouble? When we override that, inevitably, right? And we go there anyway. Right. When we override our voice, call it the voice of intuition, or inner knowing, our inner sense.
Yeah. We repeat those patterns over and over again because of that stupid ego talking. Right?
Yes, that's what gets us into trouble every time.
Oh, I know. I just shut up. I'm doing it anyways. We're all there, right?
It's craziness inside of our heads. It really is.
I really want to dig deeper, but power is a big player, especially right now in our world, and people trying to survive what we're going through in the world.
Yeah.
And having control, and the power struggles that we're having. And there's a lot of abuse of power going on. So
every single day, all we got to do is turn on the news or glance through the headlines. It's like every single day.
Yeah, 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
So I know this is a very short show, but can you speak to stepping into our power and using our power for the good rather than the bad? Because we're calling all heroes. Yeah. So we're trying to take personal responsibility for ourselves and our actions and our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And
let's start with talking about power in general, because a lot of us have an ambivalent relationship to it. Like, we want it, but we're afraid of it. And I think what we're ultimately afraid of it is that we're going to abuse it, right? Because no wonder we've witnessed abuses of power countless times. And we've also been conditioned, right? We've with thoughts and beliefs like power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's been, ingrained into us. But what they didn't tell us is that quote from Lord Acton was he was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal and interpersonal power that you and I are talking about. So then we shun it, right? Because what good-hearted person wants to be corrupted? So And then we're witnessing abuses of power all the time, so we reject it. And then we've gotten confused about power. And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to be terrified of the emotions, like we started to talk about, especially anger. And so we fear that if we really bead all of who we are, and if we really expressed our truth, that people wouldn't handle it. People couldn't handle it, and then we fear rejection, we fear abandonment. So then what we do, we stuff ourselves, and we stuff our power. How many times have we said yes when inside we really feel no? But to avoid conflict, to avoid confrontation, we say yes and put on a fake smile.
Right.
And that is not an effective strategy either. So what it's really important to realize that there's different types of power, right? And so that's what I also get into in the book. And so that we can find a way of expressing power that is a match for us. So I talk about worldly power or ego power and spiritual power. And so some of the differences are like worldly power tends to be associated with external, like things outside of us. Like we tend to feel or think money, exactly, fame, people who have a part of a hierarchy, like either a political hierarchy or educational or religious hierarchy or corporate ladder. But the thing about all those things, because they're outside of us, they're fickle. So they can be here today and gone tomorrow. And COVID is kind of teaching many people that, right? Where people lost jobs and lost money, and so much of their identity that was connected to that, and suddenly it's gone, right? Whereas the other kind of power, the spiritual power, isn't here. Nobody can give it to us, and nobody can take it away. And it's actually more powerful. So I think about, the worldly power is kind of self-aggrandizing, and it's always got an agenda. It's always trying to grab something for itself. And it kind of puffs itself up, kind of like a turkey in heat to seem bigger than it is. Whereas the other kind of power, spiritual power, is internal, like I said. So it has nothing to prove to anybody. Like it knows what it is, and it just knows. And it's humble. So I think of a Gandhi or Gandalf, right, in Lord of the Rings, with their simple monastic robes and their sandal feet. You would never know how much power they hold until it's needed, until it's called for, and then watch out. Like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point ever globally, without ever shooting a gun or landing a punch. Like, talk about power. Yeah. So that's the first step, right? It's realizing that there's different types of power, and that we can find a way of expressing power for ourselves, and that we don't have to give it up, and that we can learn how to manage it and express it in a way that is congruent with who we are, and that doesn't have to cause damage in our relationships, if we know how to handle it and how to express it.
Exactly. And I'm sure you go in deeper in your retreats and your coaching, where you teach how to access that power.
Yes. In fact, I'm starting tomorrow. Interesting that you mentioned that. I'm starting a year-long coaching program, a virtual coaching program, which we'll get into that. We'll get into personal empowerment. We'll get into how to do relationships consciously. We'll get into, life purpose and mindful leadership. We'll definitely dive deeper into the ego and how it works, and how it messes with us, and how it self-sabotages us, how it keeps us in a self-made prison, so that we can get free from that.
That's fantastic. So go check them out at soulfulpower.com if you're interested.
Thank you for putting that up there.
Not a problem. So then there's the internal conflict of being a woman or being a man, and having to take on those societal roles, and the ego and the power that we don't know we have, or we abuse it. So there's you know, we really, when we're doing this work, we really have to shed what has been given to us as we've been living in this world. You know, shedding, you know, that typical role that we've been prescribed.
Yeah.
So how do we change our beliefs about those roles?
Yeah. Well, let me say first up, the book is for everybody, but it has a particular message and intention for women, because I'm convinced that the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world is the empowerment of women. Not because women are better, not because women are not capable of using power. Of course they are, but because the world's been running off balance for far too long, for thousands of years. And when I think about it strategically, like what is the one thing that would impact everything else? I land on that, on the empowerment of women. When women are in 50% of power, we'll all have a very different relationship to how we treat the environment, to war, to poverty, to hunger, to distribution of wealth, to all of it. So, and it's for everybody at the same time, because, you know, toxic masculinity, as horrible as it's been for women over the last, you know, several thousand years, the misogyny and the oppression of women that is still rampant in this world, and the lack of equality, which is which is totally unacceptable. Even with all that, I think it's a worse prison for men. And we look at, you know, the fact that the rate of suicide is way higher among men. I think 70% of suicide in this country is committed by men, and specifically white men. And the fact that women tend to outlive men by 3-4 years. So there's something going on there. And part of what that is that this way of thinking, and we've confused what power is. So we think about, you know, going like this and not feeling and being tough. Like we think that's powerful, and it's not.
Right.
You know, this going around through life like this and not feeling, and it's like in constant state of DEFCON 1, waiting for the next shoe to drop and waiting for the next attack, and you know, sometimes doing the first punch preemptively just in case. It's like, what a way to live. And so disconnected from ourselves. And we all do that, but men do that disproportionately. And that's why men pay the price for it physically. And not only in terms of health and longevity, but a quality of life, and that sense of disconnection and inability to feel. I think it is intricately connected to the rate of suicide.
What do you think with how do you reach men to help them evolve, so to speak, so they're not committing suicide? You know, how do you reach them?
Yeah, and my heart goes out to men too, because, you know, as women get more empowered, you know, like more than 50% of college graduates now are women.
Right.
And women are catching up, you know, like I forget the number right now, but I think it's like 35-40% of women in heterosexual marriages are now the breadwinners. You know, they're making more than men.
Right.
So men are having, like, suddenly the ways that men identified as providers, as the warriors, we're going to have to redefine that, right? And upgrade those definitions to express it, and find ways of expressing it today. So I have a chapter on that, on what it means to be a man in the 21st century.
Right.
And how do we reach them? You know, it's a combination of courage and compassion, right? Because the current system, which is ultimately what we're witnessing, you know, all this reaction is what we're witnessing in the world, and all this chaos. It's holding on to the traditional power structures. And we always knew they weren't going to let go of those unfair power structures just easily. Both in terms of masculine hierarchy, the patriarchal values and systems and privilege, and white privilege. So that's one of the explanations for the chaotic and uncertain nature of the times in that we live. In some ways, we could say we're living the end of the patriarchal. We're witnessing the end of systems or systems collapse that are just no longer sustainable.
Right. I want to see more men be able to express themselves, so they're not so take on the world. I have to live in this role, sort of thing.
Yeah, and to find that balance, because we don't want them to become jello either.
No.
We want a strong, masculine, courageous, present, supportive, somebody who can balance both the warrior, explorer, discoverer, but just apply it in different ways. Like discover your within, discover yourself, explore the great within.
That self-worth, build that self-worth from within.
Yes. And so it's not about wimping out. It's like, no, right?
Yeah.
And because we also confuse, right, the feminine and the emotion, we think that's weakness. It's like, wait a minute, who said?
Right.
Who says the feminine is weakness? Just, I can only imagine, but try giving birth sometime. Right?
All I have going through is like those black and white commercials where the man's going off to work and the woman's in the kitchen. Bye, honey. So I think a lot of our society is like, got that, as they were growing up, Yeah,
it's all conditioning.
Yeah.
It's all conditioning, but to paraphrase Betty White, I'm not going to do her justice because she's so funny, but she was talking about courage. I forget who was interviewing her, and she said something like, why is it that we think, you got to have balls, to be courageous, because balls, you just thump those things and the guy's bending over in pain. You want to talk about courage? Talk about vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
I love your sense of humor and wit. Oh, that was great. Okay, so how about, I don't know, I made notes. It might be out of order from the book, but practicing gratitude. And talk about, you were in San Francisco and you were making a list of what you hated.
Yeah.
Can you tell my audience about that?
Yeah, so this is actually, I was still in the ashram when I was feeling so trapped. I started teaching very quickly, and there I was, helping people get free, helping people get empowered, and I was not feeling free. And so I was kind of in a funk and feeling trapped, and I was kind of spontaneously, I never heard of this, started writing a list of things that I hated about my life. And so I started in the present, and that naturally I started writing about things in my past, just things that I didn't like about my life, and things that I wish I'd done a different way. And it was just like getting it out until it like naturally like got to the point that there was nothing else. And spontaneously, some of those very same things, like I started writing about the things for which I was grateful. And I noticed that I was putting on that list some of the very same things because of the experience and the wisdom that I got, and the perspective that I got from some of those same experiences that weren't necessarily fun. So yeah, this is like 30 years ago, before gratitude journals were a thing. But when it's such a great practice, because we can't be in a state of gratitude and be holding on to a funk at the same time. Like there's not enough room in us. Like we can only be one or the other. So if we've got stuff going on, if we're in a funky place, just start repeating things, start writing things for which you're grateful, and it'll pop you out of it for sure.
Exactly. Yes. I'll attest to that. So practicing gratitude. And by the way, throughout his book, he has power practices. And at the end of each chapter, there's power practices to do exercises on each topic with the ego and practicing gratitude. So just wanted to point that out. And by the way, this is the first book of 3.
Yeah.
The series, Calling All Heroes.
Yeah.
So,
which reminds me, I better start working on the second one.
don't go read, go write. We had a discussion before the show. I don't like to read. He likes to read. I like to write. So,
I'm like about 50% of the way through it, but I got to start focusing on it now too.
Well, I can't wait for the next one. Honestly,
it's on relationships. So how do we do relationships consciously?
That's the next.
I think I forget the exact title, but it's something like attracting and nurturing relationships that work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to get out of our comfort zone, and in doing that, we have to trust, right?
Yeah. So, we know growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone, for better or worse. And there's a great model from Susan Jeffers' book. I'm blanking on the name. Oh, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And real simple. It's like, here's the book in 30 seconds. Imagine concentric circles, right? So this circle represents our comfort zone now. This is where we feel comfortable today, being with ourselves, being with each other, being in the world. Every time we take even a little step outside of our comfort zone and do something that requires that we place ourselves in some degree of risk, and I mean, it's not life-threatening risk, but emotional risk, right? Maybe the risk of rejection, or maybe stepping into the unknown, and because we don't know what our action, how it's going to be received, or how the interview is going to go, or if we ask somebody on a date, they could say no. So that's stepping out of the comfort zone, or placing ourselves, forcing ourselves to give a presentation if we're on stage, if we're afraid of speaking in public. And so every time we do that, even if it's just a tiny little step, a baby step, we get established in the next level of comfort zone, and then the next one. So if we would take on that simple practice, even a baby step every week, like just do something that is slightly outside of our comfort zone, at the end of 52 weeks, now our comfort zone is like way out here, and it's irreversible. Like we're never going to go back to this. So that's another great practice to take. Like every week, do something, even if it's a tiny baby step, right? Just do something that's going to force us outside of our comfort zone.
Doing my podcast has got me out of my.
Seriously, I honor you for doing that.
Well, thank you. You're an inspiration for me to potentially get out of my comfort zone and go into public speaking. I'm not ready yet, but I'm getting there. So.
Well, that model, even before I knew about that model, that's exactly how I did that. I was painfully shy as a teenager. And, I was pretty much a 4.0 student. I got 1B in high school. And looking back on it, I know that it was a sabotage, like a subconscious sabotage, because there's no way that I could have been valedictorian and spoken in front of, hundreds of people. There's no way. I just wasn't ready for that. So I subconsciously sabotaged it and grieved it at the same time, so that I wouldn't have to give a valedictory speech. I somehow got through college without being in front of a room, and I was okay, raising my hand from my desk, but no way standing in front of a group. That psychological block. But then I always had a sense of mission too, which I know you do too, and I knew that just wasn't sustainable. I knew I had to get over it. And so I signed up for a public speaking course. And for 14 weeks, I hated it, right? Because come Monday, I was already losing sleep. Because by Thursday night, I had to give 3 2-minute speeches. And come Monday, I was really like, oh my God, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? And, just like the self-inflicted mind F word, the number that we do on ourselves. And so, but what happened? After 7 weeks of getting up and doing it and surviving it, it stopped being such a big deal. And now I'm a professional speaker. I get paid for speaking in public, and I've spoken all over the world, and I've spoken in front of thousands of people. And sure, I still get butterflies right before going on stage. But as soon as I start, it's like, and that's another helpful thing, is like that nervousness, that energy of fear in the body is very, very similar to the energy of excitement, the energy of anticipation. So sometimes all we're going to do is turn that switch. Right. And so like the same feeling is like, oh my God, what am I going to do when I go on stage? Or, oh my God, how am I going to pay the bills next month? To, oh my God, I get to be on stage and I wonder how it's going to be this time. How exciting. Or, oh my God, I wonder what life is going to cook up for me and where I'm going to land next month. Right. Sometimes it's just like how we reframe the thinking.
The perception and the perspective that we look at things. So,
yeah, exactly.
Something bad and turning it into something good.
Yeah.
So in my little journey, I never really looked at letting go and surrendering, the definitions of those, and never really had a teacher explain them the way that you did in your book, which was really wonderful. And it really mirrored what was going on in my life while I was reading your books. Can you talk about letting go? Like, because everybody, I can't say everybody, but there's a need, especially in the world right now, all this chaos, for people to be in the right. They're the right one. They've got the right. So, and letting go of that.
Yeah, I mean, and letting go, period, right? The ego is a control freak, and it's a micromanager. And it's trying to control not only every aspect of our lives and what we think and what we feel, but it's trying to control everybody's life around us and everybody's emotional experience around us. And it's just not equipped for that. So no wonder we walk around exhausted and overwhelmed, because we're coming from that place of ego that is way in over its head, that it's just not equipped to even run our own lives. And so, I think it's that metaphor of stopping swimming, upriver, and just letting go and let the current take us. And I saying with that river metaphor, there's that story from Richard Bach's book. It's a beautiful myth. It's called Illusions: Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And so he starts the book with this little anecdote, parable, if you would, of this, village of river creatures who live at the bottom of the river, and they're holding on for dear life, holding on to rocks, and they're constantly being just buffered by the current, and stuff and debris that's being swept, and like one of the creatures was like, "What kind of life is this? I can't live like this anymore. I'm gonna let go." And her friends are like, what are you talking about? You can't let go. You're going to die if you do. And she goes, well, I just can't take it anymore. I'm going to do it. And then they pull in the big guns of guilt. Well, what about us? How are we going to, how can you leave us? And she goes, I'm sorry, but I just got to let go. And she lets go. And sure enough, the current takes her, and she's tossing and tumbling and hitting boulders and being hit by debris, until finally the current kind of lifts her, and she's like, this is nice. And she's just floating above everything, floating downstream. And there's another village of river creatures downstream, and then they see her just gracefully, beautifully soaring, and one of them goes, oh, look, a Messiah.
Oh, yeah.
So, the power of letting go. And counterintuitively, we think that letting go, surrendering, that it's throwing in the white towel, and it's not. And we think that it's a loss of individual will, and it's not. What happens is that our individual will becomes aligned with the higher self, the sacred, whatever you want to call it, something greater than ourselves. And so there is no loss of individual will. There's just an alignment with something that's much greater than the little limited perspective of the baseball.
Yeah, we haven't lost our power at all.
On the contrary.
And I'm just going to give an example where I've had to just recently sit and take a breath. I'm like, all I can control is myself and my actions and how I react in the situation.
Yeah.
And even though this isn't necessarily, it's out of my control, I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah.
And see what it takes me.
But that's profound wisdom, right? That's key to happiness. It's like we're never going to control life ever,
Yeah.
right? And life is going to continue throwing curveballs at us. That's one thing we can count on. Is like life is going to throw curveballs our way, and there's not one thing that we can do about that except what you're talking about, which is like we're never going to control any of that, but the only thing that we have that we can manage is our response to it. How are we going to show up in response to those curveballs?
And sometimes miracles happen through that.
All the time.
So
all the time. It's like we're actually, when we step out of the reality of the baseball, we step into that greater reality of the stadium, in which miracles and magic, for lack of another word, are commonplace. Like all the time. That's life.
And when you let go and you have one miracle, more little miracles come to you.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful. It's incredible. And so much easier. So much easier than struggling and trying to force everything and trying to make it happen. That's swimming upstream.
Right. Well, sometimes you do have to stand up for yourself and create healthy boundaries. So
without doubt, right? We're talking about a journey of empowerment. We're not talking about becoming doormats.
Right.
So we're talking about empowerment. So absolutely, in our power, with clear boundaries and very clear about what works for us and what doesn't. And we learn how to communicate our truth with courage, because it takes courage to communicate what we're really feeling and what works for us and what doesn't. And we also learn how to communicate it with compassion, right? And with gracefulness in a way that the other person can hear it. Because the ego is always about pointing the fingers and blaming. And as long as we do that, and you did this and you did that and you never do this, forget it, hang it up. That other ego that probably doesn't even know that it's an ego, all they can do is defend and build up a case and then point the finger back. And so then it becomes like, a battle of the egos until one of us explodes. And then we got a mess to clean up. If we can repair it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't pushed too hard. So you do a lot of breath work, and you do a lot of breath work in all of your work. Is that true?
Yeah, in all my live retreats, yes. I do a lot of different retreats, when I can. I haven't done live retreats since March because of COVID, obviously. And there are two, no matter what the theme is, whether it's on relationships or personal empowerment or life purpose or living heroically, there are two constants that I always do. One is teaching about the ego, because there's no way around it. If we want to be free, if we want relationships that work, if we want to feel power, have a sense of personal power, a life that's filled with meaning and purpose, we gotta get how the ego works, so that we no longer allow it to limit us and we have to break out of that prison. The other thing I always include is breath work, because more than 30 years of doing this work, I've yet to come across anything that heals as profoundly, in so many levels, and as quickly as it does. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degree's in psychology. I was, I come out of the psychotherapy world, and I was on a track to get a PhD. And when I discovered breath work, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast. And with all due respect to psychotherapy in the right hands and with clear goals, it can be profoundly helpful and supportive. And we all know that you can sit on somebody's couch for 5, 10, 20 years rehashing the same old crap, and nothing happens. Right? The reason for that is because understanding up here what happened when we were 5 or 10 or 15 is good, and it's good to know, and it's certainly better than the alternative, which is suppressing it and not remembering, because then it's still having an impact from the subconscious. But it's not enough, right? Because that trauma no longer lives in the mind. It's now been somaticized and lives in the body. So no amount of understanding is really going to get to it. So breathwork is a great adjunct to therapy. So great to do in conjunction with, because breathwork bypasses the mind and it goes to the source of the trauma that now lives in the body, and it clears it. And I know it sounds too good to be true, but I've worked with people with severe, serious trauma, with all sorts of abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, violent loss of loved ones, and the stuff gets healed. It really does. I can't argue with results.
Fantastic. I really need to practice that more. Or take one of your coaching class.
Yes, and because on top of that, it can be incredibly ecstatic and can provide amazing experiences of oneness and bliss and connectedness, deep sense of connectedness.
Right.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's amazing practice.
Fantastic. It's something I haven't, and I don't meditate much. It's horrible. I probably do, but in my own way.
You're probably doing your own way. And you know what? It's just make it easy, right? Even if it's 10 minutes, three times a week, and you can do it in a way that works for you. For some people, they're not sitting on a meditation cushion is not comfortable. It's like do a conscious walk, like a mindful walk in nature. That can be a meditative practice.
Right.
The thing is to learn how to quiet that mind, right? To pop out of that crazy, nonstop monkey mind. And the way the reason the Buddhists call it the monkey mind is because it jumps, from thought to thought in the same way that a monkey goes from branch to branch, and it drives us crazy. So the purpose of meditative practices is to quiet that monkey mind so that we can access the deeper truth. And all the answers to all our problems are inside of us.
Right. We just gotta quiet the monkey.
You just gotta quiet. You just gotta find a way to quiet ourselves. And the benefits of meditation are there's been a lot of studies on that. Not only in terms of physical health, but productivity at work. There's the tons of research on that.
I play instruments, so.
That's it. Well, that's for people, starts to people gardening.
Right.
Gardening, playing music, creating art. Those can be incredibly meditative.
Right. People think you got to sit on a cushion. You need to sit Indian style, and.
Lovemaking done consciously, right? Like before I knew practices like meditation or breath work, the only time that I popped out of my mind before I even knew about the ego, the only time that I popped out of myself and felt for that period of time, I felt like at one with somebody else, and we popped out of the barriers. It was in lovemaking. Yeah, so we could
type of energies.
Yes, exactly. What
I wanted to ask. Okay, this is kind of off topic, but do you experience any paranormal things or woo-woo things in your practice?
Well, it depends on what you define by woo-woo.
Paranormal. You talk to spirit, do you?
I don't see spirits, but I'm very intuitive. I don't, I'm not clairvoyant or clairaudient, but I'm very intuitive, and I, have profound sense and what what a lot of people call synchronicity. That's very commonplace. And that's part of, stepping out of the realm of the ego. When we step into the realm of the stadium, all that stuff is commonplace. The creativity, our relationship to creativity, it's incredible. We're more in touch with that creative flow that flows through us.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you want to share tonight that we haven't covered?
Well, I guess what I want to say is, in some ways I'm an unlikely person to be talking about heroism and personal empowerment. My adolescence was one long depression. I was incredibly shy, and as I was saying before, I know self-doubt intimately. I know self-hatred, and I also know that all that stuff can get healed. And these days, no matter what happens, no matter the circumstances of my life, a relationship works out or it doesn't. A project works, succeeds or it fails. Never, ever do I question my self-worth. Mm-hmm. So I know that if I can do this, you can do it too. To your audience listening, and in this book, Awakening the Soul of Power, it's a great first step, and I kind of guide people by the hand with short chapters and short teachings, and like you were talking about, with power practices to help people integrate them and apply them to our lives. So, so do it. It'll change your life.
Yeah, I really want to get I have 2 sons and soon-to-be daughter-in-law.
Wow.
I want them to read this book and do the practices. They probably won't, though. They're like, "Oh, Mom, just giving their spiritual stuff. Go away."
Well, that's when you were asking about the woo-woo stuff. It depends on what you mean by that. To a lot of people in my life, what I do is woo-woo.
Well, there's another woo-woo where you go into the psychic and the mediumship and that the ghosts and that realm, which I like. I like playing there. Yeah. Your third book that will come out will be on, your second book's going to be on relationships, and your third book in this series will be on
life purpose and leadership.
Oh, fantastic.
How do we step into what we've really come here to do at a soul level, at a mission level? And how do we stop selling ourselves short? How do we stop selling out for that illusion of security of a biweekly paycheck? Because, if you told me that you were making $750,000 a year, then we can talk about selling out. But most of us are selling ourselves out very cheaply, and for illusion of security. Because as COVID is showing us, the companies are here today. The companies that we sell ourselves to are here today, gone tomorrow. And if we think about the entire global economic system that we sell ourselves to, that we place our trust on, it's all illusion. It's all made up. We used to think that it was paper. Now it's not even paper. It's just ones and zeros that somebody made up in the cloud somewhere. So it's all being made up. And that's what we sell ourselves to. We sell our magnificence, our hugeness, our stadiumness. We sell it. We sell out on it.
Yeah.
For a measly paycheck. So, and I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow. Maybe, but I'm not saying that. So that's what the third book is about. How do we step into these roles that we've really come here to do? And from my perspective, it's all hands on deck, right? We're living in critical times. You can even say make it or break it times. And so let's talk a little bit about trust. When we look at it from that perspective, the planet's going to be fine. It might take a few million years. Life will continue in some form. Maybe it's an intelligent cockroach planet. Maybe that's how consciousness evolves. Whether we make it, right? We're just now beginning to experience whatever it is that we have unleashed on the environment, of which COVID is a symptom. Our relationship to nature and to the environment. And so when one of us, from that perspective, keeping that in mind, when one of us makes a choice that's going to further not only our own process of healing and awakening and spiritual evolution, but consequently all the countless lives that are going to be touched through that act, like how can the universe not support that? The universe has to. The universe has a vested interest in our breaking free, in our stepping into our power, in our stepping into our purpose. So that we can trust. That we can trust.
Becoming a hero.
Yes. Yes.
I am doing a compilation of stories from co-authors and taking the nudge from the universe, and that's them stepping in their role as a hero, their purpose, and sharing their stories and doing that with others.
I love it.
It's just synchronicity that the beginning of your book, you discuss this, and the whole book is becoming a hero. And when you take that action yourself to heal yourself, you're healing others, right?
Yes. And thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And yeah, let's talk about heroism for a minute. I know we're running out of time, but COVID, that's another thing to be thankful thankful to COVID for, is that it's forcing us to redefine what heroism means. Like we used to associate heroism with, first responders, with warriors, people who place their lives at risk, who for the sake of somebody else or the sake of a larger cause. COVID has now, expanded that. So now we include healthcare practitioners, our doctors, our nurses, our respiratory therapists. We even include our delivery people and people who are growing food for us and stocking, the grocery store clerks who are, taking risks to keep everything going and to keep us fed. So what about the rest of us, right? So that's what the book is about. What does it mean to live heroically in the 21st century when we don't have the horse hitched outside and the armors and the demons to slay, except the ones in here? And that too is what the series is about.
Exactly. And that's what we need to get through.
Yeah.
Change the world to save the planet.
Yes. Yeah, to save the planet, and at the same time, we that's where we find personal fulfillment.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for what you do and the light you bring to the world, and sharing your experiences, sharing your writings with the whole world to make a difference.
Thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for having me as a guest. Thank you for this book that you're writing, and thank you for inspiring so many people through your show and this radio show that you're going to be stepping into.
One day. Don't know how soon. But thank you for being here tonight. And everyone, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, Spiritual Alchemy Energy with Julie. Thank you and good night.
Good night.